Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Christian civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that'll determine what the future will bring. And I have to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views. And, well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Kevin Fisher. Hi, Kevin. How are we doing?
Hi, it's nice to be with you, Dr. Monteith.
Well, it's good to have you with us. Why don't you sort of introduce yourself to our listeners so they know who you are and what you're concerned about?
I'm Kevin Fisher. I live near Nashville, Tennessee. I work for the state of Tennessee the last 28 years, but in the part-time, I've been working with the discoveries that Ron Wyatt made, the late Ron Wyatt, who was an amateur archaeologist, a biblical archaeologist, who, through the Lord's leading, was able to locate the remains of Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing, Mount Sinai, and the Ark of the Covenant. And I've been able to go over to most of these places and see the evidence there, and we have the information documented on our website, arkdiscovery.com. But these discoveries are amazing, they're exciting, and it's evidence we're near the end of time, and God is bringing out evidence of truth here for mankind to see.
Well, basically, of course, we had the opportunity of interviewing Ron Sidney before he passed away, and he has passed away. I contacted his widow recently, and she suggested we talk to Kevin to get information on this subject. And I think it's vitally important because, of course, what we've been told about the location of Mount Sinai is just not true. Basically, what we've been told about the location of the Ark is not true. I think God blessed Ron Wyatt's work, and we have a fascinating 4-tape set on Noah's Ark, but of course it goes into all of these discoveries. And basically, of course, I've been, I think, 6 times to the Holy Land, and every time we go around down to Masada, which is on the west shore of the Dead Sea, we always say to the guide, well, where is Sodom and Gomorrah? And they say, oh, it's someplace around here. And yet, of course, it's there. I have other friends who've actually been there, and basically the ruins are still there. And for some reason, why, of course, did they never take the tourists to see what's left of Sodom and Gomorrah? And, of course, we're told, as it was in the days of of Noah, and certainly in Sodom and Gomorrah, it's going to be when the Lord returns. So basically, why did we start off with Sodom and Gomorrah? What's there? I mean, why don't they, when tourists go there, why don't they take them to the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah? I've never understood that.
There are some groups in the past that would go to the site, but it was several years back that a tour group was looking down through a hole in some of the remains, and others came around to look in this hole, and it fell down. These are ashen remains, former buildings, and there's hollow areas inside these. And it fell down, and 5 people suffocated in the ash. And so nowadays there's not many people being taken out there by tour groups, but some tour groups do stop and just let the visitors see from a distance.
But I mean, the amazing thing, one of my friends was there, and of course I know that Ron Wyatt had talked about the little sulfur balls that are still there. That basically my friend got some of the sulfur balls.
That's right. That's evidence, of these sites. It's a marker left behind. It's sulfur or brimstone that God rained down, and it's unique. It's monoclinic sulfur, as opposed to the natural rhombic sulfur that you see in a volcanic region. That's only approximately 50% sulfur. These contain 98% pure sulfur.
And basically, my understanding is that there's the walls, the ashen walls, some of the buildings are still there, the streets are still there. Is that true?
Yes, there are man-made formations still there. You can
hold that thought. We'll be right back. Kevin, you go right ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but the computer runs the program. I don't. Go ahead.
Sure. Yes, you can see sphinx shapes, ziggurat shapes. You can see 90-degree angles, the remains of walls coming out at 90 degrees. We've seen square windows in these formations, archways or doorways. So these are the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah. They're not under the south end of the Dead Sea underwater, because Josephus said that he saw them in the 1st century. So if he saw them, we should be able to see them. The water level of the Dead Sea has not risen since that time, the 1st century when Josephus saw them. Josephus spoke of the brimstone also. And so we should be able to see them today. In 2 Peter 2:6, it says, turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly. And this is a visible example that's mentioned here. And God wants mankind to see this evidence today.
And I really think it's important to know that this is not imaginary. There really was a Sodom and Gomorrah, and the sulfur balls are still there. That was the most amazing thing. That you always maybe sort of explain away the walls, but not the sulfur balls. You just don't find those. But they're you've actually found them, haven't you?
Yes, we found many of them there. Other people have also. It's just a matter of one getting out there in the field and actually looking for themselves, and you'll find this evidence. Now, some people have said, well, they found Sodom and Gomorrah on the other side of the Dead Sea, over in Jordan. But if you look at those remains that they speak of, they're not ashen remains. You don't find the brimstone, and so it does not match the biblical account. There's some stone structures over on the other side, over in Jordan, but they're not consumed buildings. You know, at the time of Elijah, when God sent down fire from heaven, he sent down the fire and it consumed the altar, the stone altar. The stones were burned up, and that's what we have here, Sodom and Gomorrah. We have ashen remains of the limestone blocks that were consumed, and today the ash there is composed of calcium sulfate and calcium carbonate, which are the byproducts of the limestone and sulfur burning. And you can see these on Google Earth. If you look down on the western side of the Dead Sea, you see some white ashen areas comprising Gomorrah. Gomorrah is below Masada.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment here.
All right.
Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Kevin was just simply talking about, you can see the ashen remains, the doorways, archways. There certainly, and we have talked to several people who've been there, and I hope if we ever get back to the Holy Land again, we can go there, but ordinarily the tour groups just do not go there. But here it was with Sodom and Gomorrah, and basically the limestone was made up the walls of the building. Certainly, even though it burned, the ashes are still there. Well, let's get on to some of the other major, certainly scientific discoveries that certainly Ron Wyatt made. What would be the next most important, or maybe the most important thing that Ron Wyatt really discovered?
Well, the Ark of the Covenant is the ultimate that he found.
All right, fine. Do you want to talk about the Ark of the Covenant? Because basically, this is the key to everything going on, to the rebuilding of the temple. Certainly the Jews, the rabbis, the traditional Jews, certainly want to rebuild the temple, and they want to put the Ark of the Covenant in there. And my understanding is that they certainly accepted what Ron said about it, but they've left the Ark of the Covenant where it is, because, of course, they fear that, of course, if the Arabs knew where it was, they would destroy it. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, and I think they are concerned about how to actually move it. It was around 1995 that there were 6 Jewish priests that attempted to try to reach the Ark, and in the process, they were all killed. And so God is protecting it for a certain time to be brought out. And at that time, they asked Ron Wyatt to pull out their bodies out of the tunnel which leads to the Ark of the Covenant. And so there's a special time when God wants this to come out, and sometimes man is unwilling to wait for God's timing. But let me just give you a little background with Ron White. In 1976, he had a burden for souls and was praying to the Lord, Lord, help me find something that will help someone get to heaven. So in 1977, the next year, he went out to the Mount Ararat area, and he had 3 days in the area. He had a 2-week vacation from his work as a nurse anesthetist here in Nashville, and he had 3 days out there to actually do field work to look for the Noah's Ark site. It had been found in 1960 using aerial photographs. They were able to locate it, and a group went out there, and they assumed that it was just a natural formation. But Ron and his 2 sons prayed that God would help them find the ark. And as they were driving around, they didn't know where to look, but they had a taxi driver, and their taxi stopped, just stopped totally. And they jumped out and put a pile of rocks there. They got back in, the taxi started again. And after a while, the taxi stopped, just quit running, and they jumped out, put another pile of stones there. And it happened a 3rd time. And the next day, they went back to these piles of stones and walked out from them. And what they found was large anchor stones that hung from the ark, the remains of some structure or house associated with Noah and his family, and then the remains of the actual ark site. And so these were miracles that God performed to help Ron find the Noah's Ark site today, which is a national treasure, a national park. There's a visitor center overlooking it. And so this was 1977. Ron found that.
Now, basically, of course, this is in Turkey. The Turkish government acknowledges this as the site. And, of course, everything is done to play that down and ridicule that idea. And certainly everything has been done to say this isn't the right site at all. And yet, of course, I've seen pictures of those anchor stones. Could you describe those anchor stones for our listeners? Because basically, here they're sitting out in the middle, of nowhere. So I don't know how far away from the closest body of water, and yet we see them. They are anchor stones, and massive pieces of granite. But could you describe those anchor stones? Because I'm sure you've seen them as well, haven't you?
Yes, I've seen approximately 6 of them. They range in height from 4 feet up to 11 feet in height. They have a hole drilled through the top of them, and what they did. Noah's family put a rope through there and tied a knot, and these were anchor stones that hung from the ark to help point the ark in a certain direction, to help give the ark a smoother ride. And early Christians came through this area and inscribed crosses on these stones. So on some of these stones, you'll see just 8 crosses, one large one representing Noah, the second smallest cross representing Mrs. Noah, 3 smaller crosses representing the 3 sons, and then the 3 smallest crosses representing the wives of the sons. So that's the biblical story right there of the flood and the Noah's Ark story right there with these crosses. And so early Christians.
I think people have to understand, we're talking about something that took place about maybe 4,400 years ago. That'd be about right, wouldn't it? Somewhere in that time period. 4,400 years was when Noah certainly was on the ark. And then, of course, 2,000 years later, why the Christians would, 2,400 years later, why Christ was born. And Christians then marked these anchor stones with the crosses, but they'd been sitting there for 2,400 years before the Christians got to them.
Exactly. So, in 77, he finds the Noah's Ark. The next year, he's impressed to look for the Red Sea crossing. And they look at a new area associated with mountains, which Josephus spoke of mountains obstructing their flight. And in Exodus, it mentions that they were entangled in the wilderness, which could imply the mountains. And so he went to a new body of water, the Gulf of Aqaba, the right-hand finger of the Red Sea. And it's there that he found a column laying in the water. It had fallen over, and he theorized that was used to mark the site. And they went scuba diving out from there, and they found the remains of chariot wheels in the water there. And this was 1978, the year after finding Noah's Ark. And by finding that spot, he knew then that Mount Sinai had to be over in Saudi Arabia, not in the Sinai Peninsula. That was a unique thought. Most people hadn't thought of Mount Sinai being over in Saudi Arabia.
And basically, of course, when you go on the tours over there, why, of course, you go down through Saudi Arabia, through the Sinai Desert down to Egypt, and basically they say, and there's Mount Sinai there, in the Sinai Desert. But, of course, and people go up there, and there's a monastery up at the very top. And for thousands of years, they've thought that was Mount Sinai, where, of course, they had the crosses. They went after Moses led the children of Israel, led the Jews out of Egypt. Moses led them out of Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea, and then they went up on Mount Sinai. And remember, Moses went up there for 40 days, and he got the 10 Commandments. He came down, the story of the golden calf, all of that. But, of course, is the area that we consider Mount Sinai today the real Mount Sinai? Well, apparently this was picked by Constantine's mother, and she said, well, this has got to be Mount Sinai. So it has been Mount Sinai for, about 1,700 years. But is it the real Mount Sinai? And that was really what was so exciting about certainly Ron Wyatt's discovery, because he was challenging what had been accepted by Christians for 1,700 or more years, that the Mount Sinai that everybody was going to had been accepted by the Catholic churches wasn't really the Mount Sinai. Would that the true Mount Sinai? So what did Ron find and discover?
So, yes, it was around 1984 that Ron walked into Saudi Arabia. You cannot get a tourist visa into Saudi Arabia. You just can't. Even today, you cannot. So they walked across the border and went over into Saudi Arabia. That area there of northwestern Saudi Arabia, across from Nuweiba, Egypt, the Red Sea crossing area, that area is labeled as Midian on the map. Now, that is what the Bible says where Mount Sinai should be, in Midian. So it's amazing. You can see that on any map, that Midian there in northwest Saudi Arabia is where Mount Sinai should be. And he was able to locate the burned, blackened peak of Mount Sinai over there. And there was also a split rock that Moses struck. It's 60 feet tall. You can walk through the split in the rock. There's water erosion around it. He found the remains of columns at the base of Mount Sinai. He found large altar stones with Egyptian-style petroglyphs on them, where the children of Israel have placed a golden calf on top of these stones. And so this was amazing evidence, and he did show this to the Saudi authorities the next year. In 1984, they actually accused him of being a spy, and he had to spend 76 days in jail awaiting execution, but the Lord brought him out of that. He was on national news telling about this. And so in 1985, the Saudi authorities invited him back, and he showed them this evidence once again. And there was a matching column on the Saudi Arabian shore with Hebrew writing mentioning the name Solomon, Mizraim, which means Egypt, death, Yahweh, water. And so there's matching columns on either side of the Red Sea crossing.
And basically, of course, some people said that Solomon had put that up. Do you think that's accurate?
Yes, Solomon's seaport, Elath, was right at the northern end of that body of water. And the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba was his seaport. So 400 years after the crossing of the Red Sea, he knew where the spot was.
Okay, fine. Well, we're going to be back here in just a few minutes with our guest, Kevin Fisher. But these are some of the most exciting archaeological findings, and they were done by certainly a part-time archaeologist, a nurse anesthesiologist, a remarkable man who I believe God has specifically blessed to point out where all of these areas were. Well, go right ahead, Kevin.
Okay. And so after Ron, in 1978, he found the Red Sea crossing spot, and New Mount Sinai was over in Saudi Arabia. On this same trip in 1978, he was sunburned from scuba diving. He had light-complected skin. They went up to Jerusalem to get ready to fly out in a few days, and waiting for the time on his ticket to come, and he was walking around the grounds of the Garden Tomb area, and a gentleman that was head of the Jerusalem Antiquities, the Israel Antiquities Authority, bumped into Ron. Ron told him about finding the Noah's Ark site the previous year and about finding the Red Sea crossing spot, and this gentleman asked Ron to look around at this area. There were some Roman ruins there, and as they were walking along the escarpment, this rock escarpment near the Garden Tomb area, Ron's arm stuck out supernaturally, and these words came out. There's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is in there. He hadn't thought those words, but God put them in his mouth, and he said them, and God lifted his arm up. And Ron was amazed. Why did I say that? Is this possible? And so the head of the Israel Antiquities Authority for the Jerusalem area said, wonderful, we'll give you a permit, we'll give you a place to stay, we'll give you food, and you can do the excavation here. And Ron was stunned about that. Why did I say that? So he went back to the USA and studied, is this possible? And Ron concluded, yes, it could be possible. And so they conducted a dig, started in 1979. And January 6, 1982, he was able to enter a cave underground there. Going through 100 feet of tunnels, he reached this cave, and he found the Ark of the Covenant inside this cave with the other temple furnishings in there. And it's just amazing that in 1977 he finds Noah's Ark. He finds the Red Sea crossing the next year. He has the supernatural occurrence there in the Garden Tomb grounds that the Ark of the Covenant is in there. This is in 1978. So he has in his lap Noah's Ark, the Red Sea crossing, knows Mount Sinai is over in Saudi Arabia, and he has the supernatural experience about the location of the Ark of the Covenant. Wow, all this laid in his lap, and he spent the next 21 years making over 120 trips overseas working on this material. It's amazing how he devoted his life to working on these discoveries. And so, finding the Ark of the Covenant inside this cave, prior to finding the actual Ark, they had uncovered cross holes up above in the bedrock. And they also found the remains of fingers. This was a stoning area. Golgotha, the place of the skull, was nearby. And so when he finds the Ark of the Covenant inside this cave, there's a crack in the ceiling of this cave with a dark substance. He could see that had come out of this crack and had landed on top of the stone case covering the Ark. The Ark had been placed in a thin-walled stone case to protect it, but the top of it had been broken and the lid moved askew, allowing this dark substance that was on the ceiling of the cave to fall down inside this box.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back here.
Sure.
Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Kevin is simply describing the place where the Ark of the Covenant is. And basically, of course, Ark of the Sydney of Ron was given permission by the people who run the Israeli government and certainly control all the biblically important things to actually, they gave him the right to go digging. Now, they don't ordinarily do that to Americans, allow them to have archaeological digs, but they did that with Ron because, of course, he had really, I honestly believe, that God had given him a special gift. He had actually found the Ark of the Covenant. He had actually found Noah's Ark. He had found the true Mount Sinai. He had found the crossing of the Red Sea. He had found Sodom and Gomorrah. And basically, of course, when they heard about this, they told him to look for the Ark of the Covenant. He miraculously, certainly without intentionally, had actually pointed to the point where it was and said it's there without willfully or doing that at all. This was God's actually utilizing him, and so he spent several years digging, and he got down into the caves that certainly undermined that whole area of Jerusalem there outside the wall. Now, I've been there a number of times, and most people who've taken the trips over to Israel never get to some of the most important sites, and we actually only got to this one site on our own, basically because we couldn't get to, I think we were going to Emmaus, and there was a terrorist activity there, so they couldn't take us to Emmaus, so they basically took us to the caves under Jerusalem, and basically just to if you know anything about Jerusalem, just before you go through the Damascus Gate, on either side there's a sort of a stairway, and you can go down the stairway on the left side going in, and there's a little doorway there, and you pay $1, and you go into these massive caves underlining the city of Jerusalem. And basically, of course, there are other caves going back over towards Jeremiah's grotto, and those are all blocked off. You can't get into them, but it is in that area where the Ark of the Covenant is. Would that be a fair assessment, Kevin?
That's true, yeah. Zedekiah's cave, or Solomon's quarries there, is where the Ark was originally dropped down, basically lowered from inside Jerusalem down into that cave system. And Jeremiah's men, this is in 586 B.C., the city was surrounded by a Babylonian army, and they knew the city was going to be overtaken, and so they had to secret the Ark and the temple furnishings away to a safe hiding place. They dropped it down into Zedekiah's cave. They took it up a tunnel system leading out from that area, going about approximately 375 feet to the north, and they put it inside this cave and blocked it up, and it sat there until the time of Jesus. And these cross holes that Ron found in the excavation, they happened to be above this cave, 20 feet above, through solid bedrock. And come to find out, this dark substance that fell through the crack in the ceiling of the cave came down through the cross hole up above. What happened was Jesus was crucified directly above this cave. And the Bible mentions the rocks were rent. And there was a crack in the cross hole that led down to this cave. And it mentions that Jesus' side was pierced after he had died, and blood and water came out. And this blood and water fell down onto the rocks below and through this crack next to the cross hole. And it fell down through that crack onto the Ark of the Covenant hidden inside this stone box. And that blood anointed the most holy, the Ark of the Covenant. In the temple system, the most holy place is called that because the Ark of the Covenant is considered the most holy.
Now, I think the thing is that nobody has been able to touch the Ark. In fact, if you touch the Ark, why, you died. I mean, that was the tradition. And yet Ron Wyatt was able to actually touch the Ark, wasn't he? Or did he?
Yeah, there was his fourth trip into the cave. There were 4 angels that appeared, and they asked him to set up his video camera, videotape what was to happen. They lifted up the mercy seat and they told him to take out the 10 Commandments. And in the process, he did touch the ark, but he was doing as they asked him to do, and that was to remove the 10 Commandments, which was amazing.
Well, did he put them back in again, or what?
They're on a shelf in the cave there where the Ark of the Covenant is resting.
Did he have pictures of this at all, or not?
This is all videotaped, but the video is there in the cave for safekeeping.
Okay, I will be back in a moment. This is an incredible, incredible story. If I hadn't actually been to some of these places, I wouldn't believe it.
While the storm clouds gather across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, and that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie, to the ocean, white with gold. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie, to the ocean.
Bye, Daddy.
Bye, Dad. Don't be late.
No?
White with gold. God bless America, my home sweet
Right, Pop? Right, son.
God bless America, land that I love. Beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie, to the ocean, white with gold. God bless.
Well, this is Dr. Stan. Our guest is Kevin Fisher, who takes tours over to the Holy Land, takes people who really want to see the sites that Ron Wyatt had found. And basically, this whole story is really sort of incredible. And we've had the privilege of being to Israel on a number of occasions. One place, of course, you wanted to go is to walk on the top of the wall there that surrounds the city of Jerusalem. And basically, of course, one of my favorite sites is a site where certainly Chinese Gordon, General Chinese Gordon, one of the most famous of all British generals, had been walking that wall somewhere about the beginning of the 20th century, about 1900, a little earlier than that perhaps. and sitting probably around maybe 1895. And as he walked on that wall, he looked over certainly at there's certainly a sort of a cliff of an area there, sort of a side, certainly a rock formation, and he saw a human skull there. And he looked at it, and you stand on the wall, and you can look over, and you can see the eyes and the nose and the mouth of the skull. And Chinese Gordon said, General Gordon, that is Golgotha. That is the place of the skull where Jesus was crucified. So he actually then began collecting money, and he was able to actually buy up an area immediately adjacent to the skull there on the face of the escarpment. And basically there they found a garden, and they found a tomb. They found certainly a cistern, massive cistern, where they supplied water. I mean, it's an amazing place. Basically, the Catholic tradition has one area where Jesus was supposedly crucified, but of course the Protestants go to the garden tomb, and that's where this is, the garden tomb. Well, it's just adjacent to that point, just at the base of the skull on the face of the escarpment, where of course Jeremiah's grotto is, and somewhere adjacent to that, we won't go into too much detail, but about several hundred feet away from that, and the tunnels that undermine that whole area, is where the Ark of the Covenant is today. At least that's where we believe it. Is that correct, Kevin?
That's true. That's an accurate account.
Now, could you tell us what happened? Apparently, there were a number of Jewish rabbis who thought that they'd go in there, and of course, certainly get the Ark of the Covenant, because of course this is so very important to the Jews. What actually happened? Could you give us that story?
Yes. During Ron's excavations, he would turn over items to them, and they did come to the conclusion, that he was telling the truth, that he had found the Ark of the Covenant. One of the things he turned over was this ivory pomegranate. It's 1 3/4 inches in height, but it's the only known object from the first temple, and it's in the Israel Museum there under guard. But there's no history behind the excavation of that piece, because Ron Wyatt found it, and his excavations were basically secret. They were not public. And so by him turning over items to them, they did believe him. And a problem that they have is the Ark is resting on the eastern Jerusalem side, and that is controlled by the Palestinians. So it's not technically in a Jewish-controlled area. And so one of the things they want to do would be to move the Ark away from that area over into the side that's controlled by the Jews. So they sent 6 men up this tunnel dressed in Levitical garb of the family of Kohath on the tribe of Levi, and these 6 men going up this tunnel were all struck dead. All their eyes were crossed, as if perhaps they had a stroke or something. And they called up Ron and asked him to come down there to Zedekiah's cave, and he rolled each one of the bodies onto a rescue basket and pulled them out of the tunnel. And so God's protecting it for a certain time, and that time is mentioned here in Ron's 4th visit into the cave. He had some video equipment with him, and as I mentioned earlier, he set up his video equipment there, and he noticed there was 4 angels in the cave, and they said, set up your video equipment, videotape what's going to happen here. He was stunned, but he set up the video equipment. They told him to reach in and take the 10 Commandments out. They lifted up the mercy seat. He took the 10 Commandments out. They set the mercy seat back down. He didn't know what to do with them. The angel took them out of his hand and set them on a shelf in the cave. And the angel said, when a mark of the beast law is enforced, the 10 Commandments will come out and be shown to the world. And this video of this happening in the cave is there with the 10 Commandments. Now, the angel proceeded, he said, take a sample of the blood that's on the mercy seat and have it tested in the lab. And the angel told Ron how to have it tested. So he took a sample off the mercy seat and he left the cave and took it to a lab there in Israel. First, they reconstituted it for 72 hours, putting it in a solution. Of course, at this time when he found it, it was just a hard, dark substance. They put it in a gentle swirling solution for 3 days, and then he came back, and then he asked them to put it in a growth medium for 48 hours. These were the instructions the angel had told Ron. They said, "You're wasting your time. This is dead blood. Putting in a growth medium, it's just going to waste your money." He says, "Will you do it for me?" They said, "Okay, it's your money." They put it in the growth medium for 48 hours. Ron came back after that time. They took out the sample, put it under the microscope, and he asked them to look at the chromosomes. And they put it under the microscope, and they noticed that the blood was alive. That's the first stunning thing. This blood was alive. And you can only do a chromosome count on live white blood cells. And so they proceeded to look at the chromosomes out of the white blood cells, and they noticed there was only 24 chromosomes in this blood.
And there should be 48, of course.
There should be 46. 20. You get 23 from one parent, 23 from the other.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this case, there was 23 from Mary and one Y sex-determinant chromosome from God. All of his features would have been determined by the autosomes from Mary, but there were no matching autosomes from the father. This is proof of a virgin birth, of a child who did not have a human father. And these Jews saw this under the microscope, and they said, "Whose blood is this?" And he says, "This is the blood of your Messiah." And they went crazy. They were screaming and pulling at their hair. And right before them, they could see the blood of the Messiah under the microscope, that he was born of a virgin birth. And it's just incredible, this evidence.
Well, actually, basically, in the interview I have with Ron Wyatt, he tells essentially the same story, which is the most incredible story, and basically, certainly, but then this was the most incredible man, and basically, we're dealing with things that are supernatural. I mean, these sort of things don't happen in the real world, but we're not dealing with the real world, we're dealing with the mystical world. And certainly, I believe that, certainly Ron Wyatt was chosen for what happened to him by God. He didn't direct these things. He never could have come up with all of these amazing discoveries on his own. Don't you believe that that's true, Kevin?
Yes, there are miracles involved here. And if you believe in miracles, you can believe that God used one man to bring all these items out for public viewing. We don't see the Ark of the Covenant yet, but we will in the future. The other four major discoveries you can see. You can see the Noah's Ark, the exact length that's stated in the Bible, contains man-made, unique, high-tech metals that I was able to find, Ron was able to find. We had them tested in a lab containing aluminum metal, titanium metal. It's the exact length to the foot as stated in the Bible. You see the evidence of the Red Sea crossing, the chariot wheels, human bones there, horse bones. This is incredible. How could one man find these things? And Sodom and Gomorrah, these were in plain view, but God covered the eyes of other men and allowed Ron to see Sodom and Gomorrah. Just amazing.
And really, of course, one of the most interesting things is that there have been other people have gone in there to Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. It's not a very safe thing to do, but they have done it. And basically, of course, on the rocks there, you see the inscriptions, the pictures of the cows and all these other things that are there. They're inside. Of course, Bob Wire, the studies, of course, have surrounded it because they hate Christianity, and so they don't want people going in there, but you can actually see it and other people have actually snuck in there. You can see, remember, of course, in the Bible it tells us that the tops of the Mount Sinai were burned black, and you can actually see it's burned black. I mean, you can even see this one stone there that's cleft in two, this great stone from which the water gushed out for many years. It doesn't anymore, but suddenly the of course, children of Israel had no water. They needed water. And so Moses strikes the stone, and it splits. And the water comes out, and you can actually see where that was. Go right ahead, though, Kevin. You know the story better than I do.
Sure. And so, speaking of the Mount Sinai there, Herschel Shanks, who's the editor of the Biblical Archaeology Review, he was quoted in Newsweek magazine as stating that Jabal el-Lawz is the most likely site for Mount Sinai. That's the name for this mountain, Jabal el-Lawz, L-A-W-Z. He said that's the most likely site. That's pretty amazing. And Dateline NBC, they featured this same mountain. It's been on television. Other people have been out there and have seen the evidence. Viveka Puntin, she got a job in Saudi Arabia so she could do an investigation there of the mountain. And she actually went scuba diving at the Red Sea crossing spot, and she was able to locate chariot wheels on that side of the Red Sea crossing over on the Saudi Arabian side. And so, this is incredible. One man God used, and Ron said, and it's his own words, he said, God looked around and chose the most unlikely person to partner with to reveal these discoveries to the world. And so by God using one man to uncover all this stuff, that's evidence that God is involved, because one man could not have found all these things. It's through a series of miracles and the Holy Spirit leading that Ron was fortunate enough to find these discoveries. And he said
basically, of course, we have a 4-tape set, and 2 hours of that are my interviews with Ron Wyatt, and certainly it's an important part of history. But most Americans will never hear about. But certainly, are you able to go to Mount Sinai? Do you go down to where the Red Sea crossing covers? How can people get in touch with you and find out about the trips that you lead?
ArkDiscovery.com is our website. If they'd like to see more information about the discoveries, this is exciting information. It's life-changing. We have many people contacting us. They're so excited about this material, and it does change hearts of people out there. They see evidence. And what this is evidence that God is going to judge mankind in the future, the judgment of the living, and he wants to show everyone on earth this evidence. At some point, everyone will see this evidence, the evidence that Jesus was the Messiah, his blood, and these other discoveries which show that God is the judge. He judged them at the time of the flood. He judged the wicked. At Sodom and Gomorrah, the same thing. At the Red Sea crossing, the same thing. The wicked were destroyed, but God protected the righteous. And so we have a coming judgment in the future of mankind. And God wants people to sit down and think about how they're going to worship and who they're going to worship. And this is evidence that we're near the end of time. God wants everyone to see his truth. And he cares about these people of false religions that have grown up in false religions other than Christianity. He wants these other people to see evidence of the truth, and that they will come over onto the side of Christ and give their hearts to him and to God, and have the Holy Spirit leading in their lives, and so that they can keep the Ten Commandments and do what's appropriate for the Lord. And so these are awesome times in which we're living, and it's wonderful to see this evidence that God is still in control and that he is leading mankind to the truth. And we appreciate so much what God has done with these discoveries.
Well, when you go over there, Kevin,